Hello everyone. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification course. Welcome all of you that are in the auditorium. Once again, welcome to all of you that are watching online, whether you be in the United States or internationally. Everybody in the auditorium can be seated. We're going to pick up where William left off in the last class, and truly some amazing things that we see when we talk about our environment and how our environment truly interacts within itself. It's, as we've talked about before, our environment is like a working machine. And of course, we're going to be here in the end of, we're not going to complete it tonight, but we're in the end of the respect unit. And it's a very important part that we tie into our character, realizing that we have to respect those things around us. And that's what the respect unit, chapter 7, along with going with the self-control unit, chapter 7, when you put those two together, it really brings it together on how we should respect things that, as we've talked about before, you can't even see on the microscopic level. These things that actually, they play a role in whether we stay healthy or whether we get sick. They actually play a role in how beneficial crops are to us, or how the environment's going to react, whether the earth gets sick, which we see now, and scientists are saying the earth is fairly sick right now due to a lot of things that have been put within it. So with that in mind, if everybody will be turning over to chapter 7, if you look over to page 187, that's where we're going to start. We're going to discuss a few things that William talked about. You know, it's really an amazing class, last class, and seeing those pictures, it's amazing how beautiful some parts of the earth truly is. And the rainforest is one of the most beautiful places. Of course, it has a lot of animal life and plant life that has yet even been, you know, they're always discovering something new. And even the animal life in itself, and the trees, and the medication, the medicinal purposes that are coming from those trees that William talked about, all of these things working hand in hand, and the oxygen itself. And of course, and when he was speaking last week, and he said, when you think rainforest, you usually think about South America, and that's me. When I hear rainforest, I don't really think about Australia or Africa or the other parts. I always think of the Amazons, because that's, as a child, that's what, you know, everybody called it the Amazons, and that's truly what I thought of. But I want to go back on here on page 187, just to rehearse these, once again, these amazing facts, because it's truly remarkable the things that are put within the rainforest that make it work, and the things that the rainforest accomplishes. And in tonight's class, we're also going to begin to discuss what it's like when we lose some of those things. You know, you've heard of an endangered species or an endangered list, and what it's like and what takes place, the effects that take place, as William was talking about, when we have this Amazon forest, and if we go in and we harvest the trees out, or we take things out more than it's replenishing, then we start destroying something that's very much needed. Well, here on page 187, the amazing facts, and notice it says 2.5 acres of tropical rainforest might contain more than 600 species of trees. Just 2.5 acres, 600 species of trees. Now, in comparison, forests in the United States and Canada combined only have about 700 different species of trees themselves. One study reported more species of ants living on a single rainforest stump. Now, just a single rainforest stump than exists in the entire British Isles. You know, think about that. That is amazing when you think about, here you have just a stump, probably a little bit bigger than that, you know, and you have all of these different breed species of ants that are able to work within each other, and they have to be there to get to work within each other. They produce things, they whether it be something that decays, whether it be something they're removing. It's a process of keeping everything going the way it should. And then the next one is rainforests also play a critical role in global climate regulation by absorbing carbon dioxide. You know, and that's very important, because we talked about the carbon dioxide, and of course we've also talked about how the earth is very sick because of the microbes that are in the atmosphere. It's not just, as they say, greenhouse gas, and we've shown many articles to scientifically prove it. The author did many years ago, showing that it's not just exhaust from cars and it's not wood stoves, but it's really the conduct of society themselves, and how we breed and how we bring forth different bacteria, viruses, disease, and these things become part of the atmosphere when we do this. They become part of our system, our society, our global, when you think of the whole world. And you know, COVID really did a lot to show us how when you have one virus, how fast it can spread and how many people it can affect. And it's truly that important that we guard, protect, watch over, and keep our environment safe, because we truly do affect everyone around us. And we've seen that with COVID. And then you see the rainforest regions are rich in timber, minerals, and petroleum. Many trees that grow in the rainforest are highly prized for their durability and the beauty of their wood. Teak, rosewood, and mahogany are rainforest hardwoods used to make furniture and cabinets all over the world. Once again, when you think about, and he showed the size, you know, I didn't put that in our slide tonight, but he showed the size of South America and the Amazon, and it's truly huge. Going from the western side of Brazil, it gets up into the southern part of Venezuela, into Colombia, you know, and it encompasses quite a few countries. And, you know, I've had the privilege of flying over the Amazon, being in South America, and it's really a beautiful sight to behold just from the air. I have no idea what it would be like to walk through it, but it's very beautiful from the air. And of course, that region of the world is very beautiful because it's very climate neutral. You know, the temperature is always the same during the day, and it pretty much is the same at night. Doesn't change very much, to the point that some people have holes in the side of their houses, but they don't have glass like we have in the United States with a window. They just leave them open. You know, it's not cold enough to put a window in, and the economy doesn't allow for them to afford air conditioning. So that's how their airflow comes. And houses are built very different there too. But it's very interesting when you live in West Texas, and that's all you've seen for a while, when you go somewhere that is beautiful and green and gets a lot of rain. You know, there's certain cities that are in Colombia that are referred to as the city of eternal springs because it rains so much and everything stays so green. And it is absolutely one of the most beautiful countries I've ever seen as far as landscape. But continuing on here, it says more than meets the eye. Our rainforests are more than just a bunch of trees. You know, so think of the rainforest as William was talking about last class. It's a working machine. It's like a manufacturer. You know, it's working to recycle. It's the natural way of recycling the toxins we put into our atmosphere. It works to take the things that we've used and turn it back into something reusable. And if you want to talk about reusable energy, the rainforest is one of the best sources. It's better than any electrical car. It's better than any other thing that we could have in our society or our earth, because this is something that is created, it's built to naturally do this as long as we don't devalue the rainforest by mistreating it, by misrepresenting it. You know, in the days of the Dust Bowl, there was a man named Melt White, and he said that when the farmers, they were able to get these diesel tractors, or gasoline tractors at the time, he said they took them, and for the greed of money, they went in, and his words were, they raked the land. They plowed and they plowed and they plowed, and they destroyed the land to the actual extent the wind actually removed the topsoil. And this lasted for 7 years, the Dust Bowl did. And of course, the author of The Peaceful Solution experienced a lot of that stuff. He was born in Oklahoma, right there in the Dust Bowl. And when you see how this took place, imagine if you were to do the rainforest the same way. It took years for Oklahoma to recover from what they experienced in that. Not just Oklahoma, Colorado, Kansas. There was few other states that also experienced this. But imagine if you were to go in and deplete the rainforest of South America and Australia and Africa. When that's what recycles, renews our oxygen, it plays a huge role in taking the carbon dioxide out, putting useful oxygen back in. You know, oxygen's kind of like water. You got to have it. You can't just run out of it and think, well, one of these days I'll get some more. If you run out of it, you run out. And it's not going to do you very... You can live longer without water than you can oxygen. And that's proof. Well, I won't give examples because I don't. Some examples can be very bad in certain people's lives, but you have to have oxygen. But once again here, you have rainforests must be valued not only for their lumber, grazing animals, housing developments, industry, and agriculture, but also for their diverse plant and animal life. They have untapped benefits for the human race. And that's very important, because when something's untapped, it means it hasn't been used. It's kind of, as they say, virgin soil, or it's an area that hasn't been used. It's ready for someone to start coming in and making use of whatever nutrients or benefits it has. We as a society have become a group of people to where we go in and we kind of ravage the land. We don't just take, it's not like going into an apple orchard and you take what you need, you don't get more than what you need because it's going to go to waste. Or you can it, you pick it and you can it and you store it, or whatever you're going to do with it, but you make use of it. It'd be like going in and instead of picking the apples out of your apple trees, you just go cut them all down so they're easier to pick from, and you just pick them up there. And if we do that to the rainforest, of course, we're destroying something that's a very sophisticated instrument, so to speak. It's like a manufacturer that is something that, not for sure our best scientists have the ability to reproduce it, because they're trying to figure out how to save it, and they can't do that. And, one thing we have to acknowledge as a society, and you need to test your students with this as teachers, if you have a problem fixing what is broken, odds are you can't remake it. You might try a different way, and I'm speaking of our environment and the things that are in it, specifically the rainforest, because they're always talking about what we need to do to make it better. Well, the first step in making something better is always stop what we're doing that's destroying it. And that's always the answer in every situation. When you have something that's being depleted, something that's being used and not being able to replenish itself, you have to truly consider, well, what's making it deplete itself? Because you can't have the mentality, as long as it lasts in my lifetime, everything will be okay. Because there's generations that come after us. And we have to leave a better society than what it was when we entered into it. That hasn't taken place for a long time. We've got into nuclear wars, we've got into arms races, we've got into going into other countries and taking their things. So we're getting away from this very simple thing that the earth is doing, its job, just doing what needs to be done. So it says, in addition to this, rainforests have value as a major oxygen producer for our planet. During photosynthesis, plants use carbon dioxide together with water and sunlight and produce oxygen. This oxygen is then released back into the air and used by humans and animals for important body functions. It just sustains life. And I've seen somebody try this one time. I wouldn't suggest it, because there's always this one person that wants to prove you wrong. But we were in Little Rock, Arkansas one time, and we were talking about oxygen and the importance of it, and the teacher said, try it, just try it. Hold your breath and see if you can do it. And one student pretty much passed out. He held his breath till he passed out, trying to prove his teacher wrong. Wasn't a very smart thing to do, and the teacher immediately regretted it. And that teacher taught me to never do that, because there'll be somebody that'll take you up on that. But abusing our rainforest is only one example of how a lack of value, appreciation, and respect for the Earth's resources can affect the environment and ultimately the human race. And remember, as William reminded us, we're supposed to be the dominant species, and dominant not mean like we're going through and we're the biggest, baddest thing, that's here and we're going to kick everything around. We're supposed to be the smartest. We're supposed to be the ones that govern this world we have, and we're supposed to make decisions that will help it become, not that you can make it better, but just keep it in the health that it's supposed to be in. Just keep it in the working condition. When something is working, and I think we'd have to say, unless anyone here knows how to make another Earth, I'd have to think we'd have to say Earth was pretty much made perfect. Unless you got a better way to make one, and I'm dying to see someone do that. You can start with Venus if you want to. At least you got a ball of rock and gas there. You can work with that. But try to make another one. And, we can't do that. We have to be honest with ourselves, We don't have the ability to do that. But we do have the ability to keep this one in working order. And that requires us to follow rules, to do things that are within the rules and not, as was spoken about last class, not get tied up into this money. Money, money, money. If it brings me money, there's oil in the rainforest, go knock down those trees, drill me a well, and let's start pumping oil. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all, but that seems to be the way society tends to go. Whatever brings forth money. And of course, if you've ever ridden through a desert, and I've never been to the western part of the United States, in these roads like in Montana and going through Death Valley. I've never been there and have no plans of going that way. Planes are too much easier to take than driving. But when you think about just driving and there's nothing, I was somewhere recently down south, and I was with a close friend, and we were driving because we had some business appointments, and there was just nothing for miles and miles and miles, just a straight road of nothing. And I thought, man, this is ugly. It's really ugly. But it's that's just what part of the United States and part of Mexico and part of other countries look like. Because I've been to other countries, and I'll give you an idea of how sometimes beauty, it might be nice to look at, but it's not nice when you're traveling. If I was to travel from here to Dallas-Fort Worth, it would take me, I can get to Fort Worth in about 2 hours, 2.5 hours. If I was to travel somewhere from like the border of the United States to, let's say, Monterrey, Mexico, it takes like 5 hours. Not too much. It's a lot farther distance than Dallas is, but we're talking about another country and a big city. If I was to travel, we'll say, from Bogota, Colombia to Medellin, Colombia, which is closer than Abilene to Dallas, it takes like 12 hours. Because, for one, people don't drive like, I can't say, they don't drive fast like madmen. They drive, it's a very interesting way of traveling in Colombia. I call it organized chaos. They tend to know what they're doing. Even though stop signs are a suggestion, it seems like to be color on the street, and motorcycles seem to have no rules. They just kind of go wherever they fit in. I didn't see any wrecks when I was there, and I've been there a few times. I've never seen a wreck. I can go into Abilene and see a wreck every day. But the way the road system is set up, you're going through mountains, you're going through, around mountains, you're going up things, you're going down things, and you're talking about a lot of this and that kind of, the landscaping. And it's very hard to travel there. That's why a lot of people don't get out and drive from one place. They would always fly. They would never drive. And it's not really a long distance. You're just not going to get there very fast. You're going to have to travel some spots 40 mile an hour, 30 mile an hour. Why? Because that's, when you're going straight uphill, then straight downhill, and you're on the edge of a mountain, you might want to go fast, but everybody else is not going to want to go fast, and there's a line of traffic. Even out in the country. Here the Peaceful Solution headquarters is out in the country. We have a lot of straight roads. But there, out in the country, traffic's still bumper to bumper because the traffic's so slow. So that's one thing that you get into. You get a lot of beauty and very beautiful places in that part of the world. But you get to look at it all too. If you ever go to that part of the world, make sure you get a Remus or a taxi. A Remus is just a taxi that won't drop you off somewhere you don't know. You get a Remus and you can watch everything instead of have to drive. If you've ever seen a cow pasture that's like this, you'll know you're somewhere in South America, because Texas they're like this. South America, they're like on a hill. And, getting into that, if you look over to page 188, we're going to start talking about animals. And, of course, these animals that we need. And I'm not talking about animals that we need like I really need my cat, I really love my dog. And that's part of it. I'm not saying that's not part of it. And we'll get into how that is part of it. But it's much more than that. Much, much more than that. Just as important as the trees are to us for oxygen, every animal has a purpose. And we have to start looking around at everything that's around us. and understand that everything on a microscopic level is a living thing. And everything has life. And remember, we talked about all life needs to be respected. But when we talk about animals, that's something that, well, we'll get into as we get through the lesson plan here. Turn back over to LP7E. We're going to read the procedure first, because this is where we're going to start off here on page 188. That's procedure 8. And it tells us to inform students that animal life is also an important resource to respect and value. Ask students, so this is something you're going to engage with them in, you're going to have a discussion with them. Ask students to share what they think the concept of live and let live means. Now, you're going to get some very interesting answers, but always remember everything we've covered thus far. So live and let live. Accept as many answers as time permits. Explain that there are people who regard the lives of animals as worthless and take pleasure in torturing them. Stress that no living organism should be treated cruelly. No living organism. And we're going to speak about, hopefully tonight, I learned something in going through this, that there's one thing we're going to show tonight that's classified as an animal, and my whole life I thought it was a plant. But it's actually classified as an animal. And I found that very interesting. But once again, stress that no living organism should be treated cruelly. Have students turn to pages 188 through 191 in their handbooks and read the section entitled, Animals Also Deserve Our Appreciation and Respect. So looking over to page 188, and it's very important, our appreciation and respect. Knowing they have jobs, knowing they have something to do, and we'll talk about a couple things. We're going to look at some animals too today that are on the endangered species list, and then we're going to discuss some of them, the value that they have. So here on page 188, it says, another vital resource that shares the land with us is animals. Have you ever stopped to consider how valuable the animal kingdom is to human beings? And really think about that. That's a question that the book has just posed to us. Have we ever truly thought about how valuable that animals are to us as human beings? Remember, we're supposed to be the most dominant, the most educated species on the planet. So we're supposed to be there to make sure that these things are protected and the use that is given for them, or the intended purpose that they have, is used in that proper order. Animals have always been an important resource, providing us primarily with food, transportation, and clothing. Even predators such as foxes and snakes assist us by keeping down the population of rabbits and mice that could otherwise destroy crops and vegetables. Predators, like lions and bears, although dangerous, also play an important role in the ecosystem. They single out animals that are weak or sick. By preying on those animals, they help control the population. I remember when I was young, there was a game show on, and, it was a man that was on that game show. I think he died recently, but I remember watching Bob Barker at the end of every show, help control the pet population. And as a child, I didn't have a clue what he was talking about. Didn't even know what he meant. But, after I got older, I realized he was saying, we need to have some responsibility because we just got animals going every which way. And I've been to countries, and I'll give you an example. I've been to one country, the dog population is astounding. There are so many stray dogs on the street. It is amazing how many dogs are running loose, have no owners. They're just everywhere. And I went to another country, and cats were that way. Stray cats everywhere. I've never seen so many cats. And I was truly amazed because they like to get on the roof of one building and jump on the next roof, and it sounds like a human being coming through the roof when they do it. But it's amazing. You go to two different countries, and you have two totally different problems. And in the country that has the cat problem, I didn't see very many dogs. And obviously, in the country that has the dog problem, I didn't see very many cats. The dogs would take care of that. But if we can put up our first slide, we want to talk about endangered species. And here you see it says endangered species live all around you. You likely have endangered plants or animals right in your backyard. All around you, you see images of those larger endangered animals like tigers, rhinos, and elephants. But do you see the greater effects of endangered species on the planet? And just for you to know, all of this information comes from environment.co. Environment.co. That's the website. To our next slide here, it says, perhaps you feel bad for them. But that's the extent of how much you think about the effects of endangered species. In other words, it's such a shame. But we do nothing to help change it. However, if they disappear, your life might change drastically. As more and more species are put on the endangered list, the risk of extinction rises and the whole world can change. Well, going over to the next slide, we're going to talk about what are the consequences of extinction. And here it says a recent study found that extreme environment change could trigger as an extinction domino effect. One of the study's authors said, because all species are connected in the web of our life, our paper demonstrates that even the most tolerant species ultimately succumb to extinction when the less tolerant species on which they depend disappear. So saving one species means saving its habitat and the other species that live there too. Now here's another example going over to the next slide. When you lose one species, it affects the ecosystem and everything around us, or everything around it gets a little bit more fragile while it adapts to change. And that was spoken by Kelsey Woodall. He's an assistant director of the Earth Institute for the Center for the Environmental Stability. Even if it's not a keystone species, a species that others in the ecosystem depend on, its loss will weaken the functionality of the entire ecosystem, which just makes it easier for that ecosystem to stop working. So when you take one thing out, it's like having a piece to the puzzle. Imagine you have a water line coming to the side of your house, and you have a water hose, but you have no water bib to put your water hose on. You can have one supply here and one supply there, but if you don't have what connects it, you're not going to get the use of it. And if it's something you need to water for it to live, well, it's going to be gone. And that's not an example of animal life. We're going to get to that here as we go through the lesson. That's just an example to try to get into our minds how, you have to have, if you're at point A and you want to get to point C, you have to get to point B. If you're at number 1 and you want to get to number 3, you pretty much have to go through number 2. It has to take place. So continuing along with our slides here, the topic is what are the consequences of extinction. It says if a species has a unique function in its ecosystem, its loss can promote cascading effects through the food chain. A trophic cascade, impacting other species and the ecosystem itself. Now, getting into an example into the next slide, it says, an often cited example is the impact of the wolves in Yellowstone Park, which were hunted to near extinction by the 1930s. Without them, the elk and deer they had preyed upon thrived, and their grazing decimated stream sides, willows, and aspen, which had provided a habitat for songbirds. This left the stream banks susceptible to erosion, and a decline in songbirds allowed mosquitoes and other insects the birds would have eaten to multiply. When the wolves were reintroduced to the park in 1995, they once again preyed on the elk. Plant life returned to the stream banks, and along with it, birds, beavers, fish, and other animals. So just think about that. You take out the wolf, which, a lot of people would think, I wouldn't want to be around a wolf. That's a deadly animal. That's something we don't need in society. But when you see, this is a study that was done here. This is a scientific result that they've studied, they've seen, and they've seen the effects of what it meant to reintroduce that wolf. Reintroducing that wolf back into the Yellowstone Park actually helped the streams. It took away the erosion. It helped control the population of the elk and deer, and even affected the birds and helped control the insect population. Just a wolf. Or wolves. So that's very important when we see how just taking one thing out of something makes a huge difference. I learned that growing up when I remember my grandmother was teaching me to make bread, and I forgot to salt it. And it was a certain bread, you know, it took a while to rise, and to me, when I was a child, it seemed like it took 3 days for it to rise so I could actually put it in the oven. I was wanting to eat it before I got my hands in the flour, so to me, I didn't have the patience for it. But I forgot to salt it. And after I went through all of that process, the first bite I took, I was like, oh, this is disgusting. Well, it's because I left out a very important ingredient for taste. And I remember I threw it away. It's like, oh, it wouldn't worth the wait. And I've always remembered that it's pretty important to put salt. But once again, we're talking about animal life. And there's certain animals, as we proceed, we're going to get into, there's certain animals, if we were to remove them from our ecosystem, we would not survive as human beings. We could not survive as human beings. But continuing on with what are the consequences of extinction. Over to the next slide. It says, if a species has a unique function in its ecosystem, its loss can promote cascading effects through the food chain. And that's, once again, a trophic cascade impacting the other species as well as the ecosystem itself. Now, I want you to look at this next picture. And this is a picture of an endangered animal. And, you know, and that, to me, that's one of the most beautiful pictures you can see. You know, and I know a lot of people are going to say they found Nemo, but that's not what we're talking about here. And the fish are not the endangered species. It's not the endangered species at all. If you go to the next slide, it's the corals. The corals, and, you know, you can go in, and I encourage teachers to show how much we as human beings affect corals and the coral reefs. There was a study done many years ago, and I remember the author of The Peaceful Solution wrote a warning, so to speak, a letter to world leaders on behalf of The Peaceful Solution about the topic of how the coral reefs were testing positives for the herpes virus. And it was totally annihilating the coral reef. And there's many studies that I encourage teachers, when you deal with this with your students, go into those studies and get those studies and show how they're being decimated. And the coral reefs are very important themselves. But here in our first slide about the coral reefs, it says, many people mistakenly assume coral is a type of plant. However, it's actually an animal that relies on a unique symbiotic relationship to survive. It's easy to miscategorize corals as plants. After all, they don't look like animals, and they stay in one place virtually their entire lives. And going over to the next slide, it says the reason coral is a type of animal is largely because it does not create its own food like plants do. Coral is a colony of organisms made of smaller organisms called polyps, which root on the ocean floor or on the hard skeleton other polyps form. The one piece of coral, as we see it, is actually many small polyps. So what we see and the beauty we see there is not just one thing, it's a lot of things all working together. You know, in unity they're working together. Could you imagine if the polyps argued with each other? No, I want to be here, you can't be here, I want to be here. You know, and you think about, well, these things are created, and they're created to work like this. And when they work, they sustain life, and they do really important things that we benefit from that we don't even know about. So on the next slide, going over to the next slide, it says the importance of corals can't be underestimated. These animals are the heart of any reef. They provide shelter for other species to reproduce, live, and find food. They help filter the water and prevent shorelines from corroding. Coral feed on debris in the water, so it also keeps reef water clear and clean. Without coral, reefs and the thousands of species they support would die. Notice, the thousands of species that they support would die. And one thing, if you've ever seen pictures like we just showed of the corals, if you notice, the water is always absolutely beautiful. And one of the most popular things that take place in areas like that is snorkeling. People will go because it's just so beautiful underneath the water, and there's many I can't swim, so even snorkeling is too deep for me. That's just more than I want to do. But I've seen pictures and I've seen videos like on Animal Planet and Planet Earth that it's just absolutely beautiful, the detail. And it's not really just the beauty. This is a working instrument here. This is something that's extremely important, because all of those fish, as we've seen those fish in the coral, if you take away the coral, they all die. They're not there anymore. And there's also an animal that could affect us that way. But we're going to go through a few animals, and not all of them are because they present life, but I want you to notice, going to the next slide, this is a certain bird that's on the endangered species list. And here's a pair of them. When you look at how unique they are, and if you've ever seen certain birds, these don't have a lot of color, but you look at the beauty that they actually have. And you see that animal and you think, there's going to come a time, if we don't make a change, this will not be here any longer. Because all of these animals we're getting ready to look at are on the extinction list. Then you go to the next one, and you see, people will be like, oh, that's so cute, I'd love to have one of those. And this animal has a purpose. They can argue over whether it's a cat or a dog, I guess. That would be the first deal to encompass people. But you're looking at an animal that is on the extinction list. And then the next one you look at and you would think, oh, not that. Well, that's a certain type of leopard leopard cheetah is what they slashed it as. And that one's not going to be around much longer. There's very few of those left. And remember what it talked about, how you need these lions and so forth to control the population, to remove the weak and the sick. And then the next animal you see, and all of these people, oh, I'd love to have one of those too. It's so cute. Take it home. Well, these animals bite also. Not all animals are meant to be caged up. Some of them enjoy, imagine I've always said, if you want to take that animal home and put it in a cage, and you should be willing to go live down at the county jail. That's pretty much what it would be like. Some of these animals were meant to work with the ecosystem. A lot of them were. You have domesticated and you have wild animals, so they're a little bit different. And then, of course, you have next one is the wolf. And this is what they call the Mexican-American wolf. And there's literally only, I think the article said, now there's only 113 left. And they're trying to rebreed them, but they don't want to domesticate them, because if they domesticate them, they take away the purpose of what they're supposed to do. So it's a real challenge. And why are they so low in population? Because they've been shot and hunted and destroyed because they were suspect to destroy cattle. People raising ranches didn't want their animals, so they'd shoot the wolves. And if you've ever driven in West Texas, it's a common thing to see not this specific wolf, but you see wolves just hanging on fence posts. Now, here in West Texas, we have a huge problem with them. And, and if you don't do it, you're going to lose your sheep, because they'll take care of your sheep. The coyotes will. But the coyotes are not on an endangered list either. They like to come in and steal. They don't help control the population. They just come in and steal. So everything has its place and everything has its purpose. But looking over to the next animal, this is probably the most important animal to human beings. When you look at that and you think, man, those bees, they sting me, I swat them. If I see one, I get rid of them. It would be important for teachers to get students to understand, go online and just pull off a couple videos. We're not going to do it tonight, but pull off a couple videos. Show how people will pay enormous amounts of money, and it's a huge business, to relocate beehives to their orchards, to their gardens. In California, this is huge business. People will transport bees almost across the United States to get them there. And people will pay enormous amounts of money because they're very essential to actually helping everything grow. Without a bee, you're not going to get pollination. And if you look here at the next slide, we're going to talk about the bees. And it says, these insects, besides providing us with a tasty sweetener, known as honey, they are the most important pollinator on the planet. So there's nothing more important that does this job. Mankind, we ourselves have not been able to create an artificial pollinator that can compete with the bee. We create pesticides and we create all these other things that make bees sick, but we have not been able to recreate or to do anything as perfect as the bee. And that bee serves a huge purpose. Now, once again, that's ahead of birds and bats. And we're going to talk about bats, because bats play a huge role in our society also. A quarter of the flowering plant species depend on them. The overexploitation of agriculture land to feed the human population is causing a decline in the population of these insects, whereas in reality, 70% of the crops depend entirely or partly on their pollination. And one thing that I always encourage people to look at when we talk about overpopulation, you might live in New York City or Chicago or San Francisco or Los Angeles, and you might look around and think there's just way too many people on this earth. You might live in Tokyo, largest city, and Mexico City, two of the largest cities on the face of the earth, New Delhi in India. And that might seem large, but you should come down and take a ride in West Texas and drive somewhere down into southern parts of Mexico, and you'll see that there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles of nothing. Nobody. It's not that we overpopulate the whole planet. We don't organize ourselves very well. We tend to think that, if you've ever been to Washington, D.C., that's the most populated city per square mile in the United States. And if you're an introverted person, that's not the place for you to go because I've never seen so many people in my life. It's just not a place that you're going to. It's just people everywhere. And they're all walking. Most people not driving there. And I've never been to New York City or to a big city like that. I've been to other big cities of millions of people in other countries, and it's extremely populated. And of course, different places, depending on economies, have different ways of getting around. New York has a huge subway system and bus transportation, and the same thing is kind of done in, I'll give you an example like Medellin, Colombia. There's a transportation system like New York, but theirs is up high, like 5 stories in the air. And when you get into it, you go way up because Medellin is nothing but a bunch of mountains. So you go way up and you get a view of everything, and then you come back down. And that's their system, their subway system, but it's not underground, it's above ground. They call it the transport system. And of course, you do these things, and the reason they did it, because they did not want to destroy the landscaping that's already there. And of course, everything there is built on a mountain anyway, so it's not easy to do it that way. But when you have all of these things, and you can give, think of some countries right now. You have the United States, you have Russia, you have China. Everybody's talking about nuclear war. You have Ukraine. You have Libya. You have North Korea. You have South Korea. You have all of these countries, from Iran to Saudi Arabia. Everybody's got an idea of what they want to do. You talk about these nuclear power countries. You talk about what they can and can't do. Well, one thing that we all have to have, I don't care what country you're from, I don't care what language you speak, I don't care what color your skin is, you will not survive without bees. You will not produce plant life food that is essential for our bodies without bees. And when we see about the bees not being able to keep up, that's what is said in this article. Not to contradict the article, but it's very important to have your students look into what are making the bees sick. Remember, we just read at the very beginning that if you see something's becoming extinct and you just think, oh, that's just too bad. You're not doing anything. You're not showing care, consideration, and concern. What can you do to help it? And of course, when you get into the study of what's destroying bees, you'll find out a lot of pesticides, a lot of chemicals that we're spraying on our plants. The bees are trying to do their job, and they're pretty much becoming, I guess you could call it fentanyl for bees. Because the chemical that we're putting on the plant was never meant to interact with the bee. And even though a company might say that, oh, it's safe for bees, it won't hurt. Well, it is hurting, and it's scientific proof that it's hurting. And it doesn't matter whether your name is Monsanto or Bayer or whatever you want to call yourself. If you're creating something that's making the country, the nation, the world sick, then we have to make a change. And I'm not knocking on those countries. Those companies. Those are just the ones that's always in the news. And those are certain companies that certain countries will not allow their product into their countries because of the effect it has on the wildlife and also the people. Now, looking over to the last animal we're gonna look at tonight, these are bats. And I remember growing up, me and my two brothers, this was how boring life was back in the days when I grew up. We had an old plastic swimming pool, and we would go outside when it was getting dark. You know, we got tired of playing with the fireflies. In North Carolina, there's fireflies everywhere. They call them lightning bugs. Well, when we would get tired of that, we would throw rocks in the air and watch the bats chase the rocks to the ground. And we'd hide underneath the swimming pool because for some reason, we thought the bats were going to get us. So we would do that. But back then, and I only know how important bats are because I heard the author of The Peaceful Solution speak about it one time before. And that's why I knew I had to put bees, because I've heard him speak about those and I heard him talk about bats. And going to the next slide, you know, this is something we don't think about. You know, we think about bats, that's just a rat with wings. So looking over to the next slide is some facts on bats. And it says bats in urban areas can consume nearly 14,000 kilograms of insects in a single night. You know, out here in West Texas, we have blue martin. They like to consume the mosquitoes, and they'll take care of them. But think about these bats in the urban areas. Notice it says, thus freeing us from harmful pests. Now, I'll be honest with you. I've seen the trucks going around in Abilene spraying the spray for mosquitoes. I would much rather see bats than seeing somebody spraying something in the air and they are covered from head to toe with a respirator inside of a truck. That scares me when I see that being sprayed and the man spraying it is afraid to breathe it. It's kind of like David talked about the man at the water treatment plant that didn't want to drink the water that was at the end of the system. You know, and I see some teachers shaking their head. We were all there because we actually asked the guy to drink it, and he wouldn't drink it. He wouldn't dare drink it. Said there's no way he was drinking it. And he told us why, too, but we'll leave it at that. But he, you know, it's a scary thing. I'm glad to hear. I know we had a class where the mineral water was endorsed, you know, but it's well water. That's why a lot of us here, we prefer well water. You know, but it's not always available to everybody, I know, but, you know, people shouldn't have to live like in Flint, Michigan either. That's kind of a sad situation. But getting back here to the bats, I'm getting too far off. Well, they free us from these harmful pests. In their movements, they can carry with them all kinds of seeds that contribute to the extension of the forest in the middle and tropical latitudes, as well as to pollination. They can disperse more than 30,000 small seeds overnight. Think about that. A bat, you know, or some people say a rat with wings, can eat 14,000 kilograms of insects and distribute 30,000 small seeds. It's possible they can do that. Now imagine if you were to lose that animal, what would take place? Imagine the change in our ecosystem that would take place. You know, we would have a drastic change in how it would affect us. It would be more than removing wolves from the Yellowstone National Park and the streamlines receding, the songbirds going away, and the mosquitoes coming up a little bit more. It would be very different. Well, with that in mind, going back over here, we're talking about having this appreciation for animals. Page 188, the second paragraph. And we can't emphasize enough how much, as it's said in the lesson plan, to engage with your students as time allows. You know, you want to have conversation about these things. And students need to leave your classroom realizing there's at least one animal they can't live without. So they have a new respect for it. Because a lot of people don't think about bees. You know, they'll swat them. They'll think, oh, they're worthless. Honeybees especially. You know, or bats. You know, it's just, who cares? Nobody likes them. They're a nuisance. And they can be. You know, we think of rabid bats, you know, bats with rabies. That's one thing. But, you know, dogs, cats, and other animals get rabies too. It's not just bats. But here on page 188, the second paragraph, it says, in addition to this, there are animals that have been trained to guard people and property, to assist the blind, and to herd cattle. And you think about that, you know, you see guard dogs. There are a lot of them in Abilene in chain fences, and of course they have to be kept to a certain area. And of course you think of a guard dog, you know, it'll scare one person to the point you think it's going to devour you, but it can be trained to totally acknowledge another person as its best friend. I remember when I was very young, I had a supervisor. He was the business administration of a furniture factory I worked for, and he had 2 German Shepherds that he had. They were very well-trained German Shepherds. They were actually trained in Germany. And he paid to get them over, and he thought the world of those dogs, and he was going to Cozumel, Mexico, and wanted me to take care of them. And he said, you got to come out here and you got to learn to care for them. And I thought, I've had a dog my whole life. It's not that bad, you know. He said, no. He said, first of all, you have to give commands to these dogs in German. They don't understand English. You have to command them in German. So I wanted to see how this worked. And he lived in the middle, right in the middle of a downtown of a place that was very populated. And these dogs had their, you know, their cages that were probably 10 by 15, each one separate, 2 male dogs. And we opened up the door, and man, out the one went. And he said, do one at a time, never do two. 2 will get into trouble, 1 will always listen. And opened it up. He said, just let it run around. If it goes to go out of the yard, and I don't remember the command he told me to give it, but he said, if it goes to go out of the yard, just yell this. He'll come straight back to the cage, and he'll start over again. And I thought, I got to see this. So I seen him getting ready to go out into the road, and I yelled the command, and immediately he came right back to the cage, stood at the door, turned around, and went back off to wander again. And he told me, he said, it's very important you don't try to play with him in this. In other words, don't let him get 10 foot away and call it back, because he won't listen after that. You have to let him know this is where his boundaries are at, and this is what he needs to do. And then the other dog he let out, he didn't tell me that one listened better than the other, though. I found that out for myself. But I let the other one out at a different time and did the same thing. It listened, not as quickly, but it listened. And even when it come to feeding it, he had a certain size cup, and he said, you give it this cup, and you give this cup 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening, no more. And of course, here I'm there, and I'm doing yard work and everything, and I get there one day, and I can't remember, did I feed those dogs or didn't I feed those dogs? Well, what's the best? Well, I guess I better feed the dogs. It's better to feed them twice than not feed them at all. And, you know, he came home later that day, and he immediately come to me. He said, you fed those dogs twice this morning? I was like, I honestly couldn't remember whether I did or not. And he laughed. He goes, well, I only know because I've done it myself 100 times. I said, how do you know? He said, you feed them once, they're healthy. You feed them twice, it gives them diarrhea. They can't handle it. Their body is so well trained to that amount, 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening. And he goes, I've done it myself. He goes, I can't remember if I fed him or not. So, yeah, I kind of agreed with him. I'm like, yeah, you should come up with a better system. I would have known if you had a better system. I could have done that. You know, which is not being very responsible. We'll get to that book. You know, I should have been more responsible. You know, and another thing, you know, as you see here reading on, it says, in recent years we have discovered the therapeutic benefits of animals. There are programs that use dolphins and horses to help children born with physical disabilities become stronger and more functional. Studies have also shown that having pets helps lower blood pressure and can lift a person's mood. You know, and if you fly a lot, you notice in the airport, you see a lot of emotional support dogs. There is an enormous amount. It's almost like every 10th person has a dog. If you fly into Dallas-Fort Worth, there are dogs everywhere. And I asked one guy one time, I said, you know, I want to ask you a question. You don't have to answer me. When you're sitting there waiting for a plane and everybody's waiting, you just find somebody to talk to. And I said, you don't have to answer me. I'm just interested. What is it that the dog does for you? How does it help and support you? I'm just really interested in how it works. I'm not interested in, you know, I'm not trying to say there's a weakness that you shouldn't have. I'm really interested in how this works. And it was amazing. He said that his problem is he has a great fear of flying, but his job requires him to fly, but he's scared to death to fly. But with the dog that he has, which is trained, when his dog is calm, he is calm. If his dog doesn't seem like it's scared of anything, it calms him down. He's able to do it. He said, but I've been on a plane before and a siren kind of went off and my dog freaked out, and he goes, and I freaked out. And I didn't calm back down till my dog calmed back down. And there's just some connection that it kind of made with him. And I thought it was very interesting that these two could work together like that. You know, so it's very interesting how animals are able to help us even emotionally. Some people look at animals as children, you know, and they really mean the world to them. But continuing on here, it says, animals also assist us in keeping the earth clean by consuming the carcasses of dead organisms and other waste. You know, and think about that. You're talking about the trash can of the earth. Here you see pigs, vultures, lobsters, catfish, and shrimp are only some of the scavengers that fall into this category. I don't remember, did I put that next slide in? Is there one more slide or not? I don't think I put it in because I thought people would be eating around this time of day and I didn't want people throwing up. But let me read one more time what these animals eat. Animals also assist us in keeping the earth clean by consuming carcasses of dead organisms and other waste. Pigs, vultures, lobsters, catfish, and shrimp are only some of the scavengers that fall into this category. And the author used to tell a story about a pig farm in Purcell, Oklahoma, where he lived. And anytime something died, whether it be a horse, a cow, and you're talking about from disease, they would take the horse, the cow, whatever it was, and they'd throw it out to the pigs, and the pigs would just consume it. They would eat every bit of it, lick it up, didn't matter if pus was coming out of it, rotten smells. The smellier it was, the better the pigs liked it. And they would eat it. That in itself would ever prevent me from eating pig meat, knowing that pigs eat waste, trash. And I'm not telling other people what to do, but I have never looked at a trash can and thought, I bet that's tasty with barbecue sauce. It's just, when you look at what these animals do, a vulture, you see it eating rotten animals here in Texas. You'll see them eating deer. When you see that lobster and shrimp, they clean up the waste of all the other animals that fall to the bottom, and they'll eat the waste. I would tend to want to eat something that's eaten like grass. I wouldn't want to eat something that's eating fecal matter. That seems to be kind of counterproductive to my body. My body, usually when you have fecal matter, that's what your body can't use, and you're supposed to get rid of it. I personally don't want to eat something that's what it survives on. That's its job. It's a trash can. That's what it does. But in addition to this, notice it says, there are also microscopic organisms that consume the waste from other animals. A lack of understanding of the vital role animals play in keeping our environment healthy and functioning has led to the extinction or near extinction of many species. And you think about, we talk about eating these trash cans here that consume waste, and think about how dangerous it is. You see this in the news all the time. It's very common, I'm not trying to put down this state, but in Chihuahua, Mexico, they have an enormous amount of places that raise lettuce and spinach. And in that area of Mexico, it's very common to use human waste to fertilize stuff. They'll spray it with water. They also have runoff from cattle. And it's very common, you'll see flashes on the news. If you bought this spinach from this store, or this, 14 people sick, 3 have already died. Well, what took place? Spinach is supposed to be healthy. Lettuce is supposed to be healthy. And it is. Until these bacteria, as we just read about, these microscopic bacteria that are supposed to be separate. They're not supposed to intermix here. Every kingdom, so to speak, has its boundaries. Just like every animal has its purpose. Some aren't meant to be used for certain things. And of course, when you take these microscopic organisms and you let them be coated onto the lettuce or to the spinach or whatever, and it gets into the grocery store, and then you wash it and you don't get it all off, well, then you get listeria, and then you end up at the hospital, and then you end up sick, and a lot of people die from it because you have if you can imagine it this way, you have a kingdom that operates perfectly within its boundaries. But if that kingdom gets inside of another kingdom that is not supportive of it, you have war that starts, and it makes people sick. And that's why you get violent, not to put the thought in your mind, but you'll get violent diarrhea because your body is trying its best to get it back out. What you put in is not supposed to be in here. It has to leave. And as we've talked about before, people don't think in the United States about diarrhea being deadly, but it is. It's the 3rd leading cause of death in Africa. So when you see these things, never take them for granted. And we're going to stop right here because I'm sure William is going to pick up, especially with the scavengers, and what the earth brings and what the purpose of these things are. Because really, respecting wildlife is respecting their jobs and respecting the purpose in which they actually have and the purpose they're actually serving us. And we all work together. And that really helps our ecosystem work hand in hand. Our next class is going to be, was it 10-4? It'll be 10-4. It'll be this Wednesday. Yeah, it actually be after our seminar. You know, for those of you that are not aware, I'm pretty sure a lot of people watching are aware, that will be the day for our Peaceful Solution Fall Seminar, and there's going to be a lot of things brought out, a lot of encouragement, a lot of things that, you know, a lot of countries, and I know there's a lot of countries sending things in, but there's a lot of encouragement to show how the Peaceful Solution is truly like an oak tree, and it's growing, and it's growing, and it's growing, you know, and I don't want to spoil things, but as things grow, you have to build. You have to increase in size. And, you know, we see stuff growing everywhere. And we'll see more about that on that day when we have our Peaceful Solution conference. But I encourage everybody to tune in for that day, because not only will you have the conference, I think it'll go to about 2:30 or 3:30. Then we're going to have class at 5:30. And it'll be really bringing everything, tying it all in at the end of the day. So once again, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. We'll pick back up here again on page 189, and we'll still be in Procedure 8. Thank you once again.